Hiya! Welcome to this, my 52nd episode of VideoFuzzy. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, sifting my basket of media memories, and in this installment, titled Metaphysical Zoological Hallucinations, I encounter this huge slug of odd movies. I feature a West Wing marathon I encountered in my classic collection, and in my current collection, FX's Legion took a deep, satisfying bow this past week. Enjoy the show!
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
In What's Going On With Me, acting on a realization I had while putting episode 51 together, I only really need to be using my DVD recorder when I'm recording a DVD. Otherwise, I'll just use my LG DVD player, Algae. I pulled it up and tested that theory, and yeah, that'll work just fine for this project. I cataloged 11 discs for my classic collection and 4 for my current collection just fine, even frame advanced, the title reference for this episode, no problem at all. Clear picture, sounds just fine, and if it ever wears out or I need to replace it, I'm out maybe $30. So, since I've still got more than 1,800 discs to catalog here, that'll definitely save some wear and tear on my Sonya double recorder. So, yep, she's been sidelined unless I need to make a disc set or a Frankendisc something. I almost did that with a Monty Python entry recently, when PBS aired Monty Python's Personal Best programming, featuring, the best of Michael Palin and the best of Terry Jones. I see where I caught the personal best of Terry Gilliam's production, featuring his endlessly zany madcap animations. Tracking its entry through my catalog listing, I'm finding that one is split across 3 discs in my collection, showing up on discs 446, 447, and 715. There's also another Psych episode I could reunite one day called 9 Lives that got broken up across discs 501, 505, and 506, but that's, well, never say never, but for right now I'm just focused on cataloging these things. Oh, and before we get into it here, correction. Error. Just really quick, I was putting my comments together on Claws from Memory, and in episode 51 I said the Triads had shot Quiet Anne's fiancée Arlene in the closing moments of the Chicken Kitty episode, which again is not its name, but that entry, short though it was, contained 2 errors. First, Arlene was not shot, the professor slit her throat, and also she was no longer Quiet Anne's fiancée at the time. She was in fact her wife. They'd gone the Justice of the Peace route, which I'd clearly spaced or something. Clearly having learned nothing from her past adventures of targeting people for murder, salon operator and money launderer, and it would appear cold-blooded killer Desna tells Quiet Anne that Melba Locklear killed Arlene. Oh, because the professor told Desna to kill Melba Locklear, and she didn't want to? So she's sicking the pregnant sister of a gubernatorial prospect on the corrupt casino operator's widow. Christ, Desna, if you need to kill Melba, yank her oxygen tank away from her and get her to chase you. Take some initiative and some responsibility. Well, it's already in my DVR waiting for me to see what happens, but yeah, sorry for any confuse.
Friday Night Feature.
One significant portion of my video archive features Bravo's syndication of The West Wing, and I encountered, I think it was a Memorial Day special, possibly from 2004. Bravo aired what it said were the top 10 fan-voted episodes. The episode countdown I encountered were numbers 7 through 2 I found on discs 718 through 721. Usually what I do in these features is lift up an episode and talk about it, look at its significance at the time, perhaps what stands out to me about it, and tie it into our current media landscape. At this moment in history, no one who ever watched The West Wing, who enjoyed The West Wing and the exemplary writing, acting, and singular delivery needs me to talk about the world this show evoked. For most of a decade, Aaron Sorkin crafted a universe in which high-minded ideals, principles, priorities, thoughts, and ideas, good, well-intentioned people battled for supremacy. We would be caught up short by the reality that the treatment of municipal waste had been dangerously marginalized and was becoming a significant issue, that the environment, civics education, social justice, women's rights, separation of church and state, gun laws. Hell, they showed the aftermath. The president had been shot, season 2 premiere, the impact not just on an administration tries to muddle through carrying out the business of the country while the president is on the operating table with a gunshot wound, but the extraordinary reassurance that impossibly well-trained, impossibly dedicated, fiercely loyal operatives will track these criminals and bring them to justice, reinforced again and again through The West Wing and A Few Good Men, a kind of worshipful awe for military services, an abiding theme for Sorkin. He was not, however, content to write of demigods and goddesses who were the worst offense was being too smart and too honorable. His characters were human, and they had a dark side. By season 4, Sorkin had crafted a murkier ethical environment where the people in control were sufficiently comfortable with their use of that power to target a foreign leader for assassination. The ethical underpinnings on that decision, along with its aftermath, track through the rest of the season and become downright Shakespearean at times. What I love most about this show, which ran from the late 90s through the mid-noughties, is that, well, for one thing, while the canvas was top-level American leadership, the fictionalized world of this show depicted good, if complicated, people muddling through their ethical quandaries best they knew how and facing the consequences of their actions. And despite the intelligence, research, undeniably smart writing of this show, the team never forgot that they were telling a story. You rarely had a character sit down, face a camera, and drone policy initiative. The show explored drama, relationships, arguments, and one-upsmanship, but you felt at the end of an episode that the burdens of decision-making at the top levels of our government were borne honorably, thoughtfully, with discipline, and generally to the extent that it mattered for the good of the people. I've never seen House of Cards, likely never will at this point, but from descriptions I've heard, the environment of that production is more power-brokering, influence-peddling, less honor, more vengeance. In episode 46, I talked about Stephen Bochco's somewhat less skillful one-season take on the subject with ABC's Commander-in-Chief. There's a show that exists called Madam Secretary, and that's honest-to-God all I know about it. And what little interaction I've had with Veep suggests the Julia Louis-Dreyfus helmed White House is a bit more comic than Martin Sheen's operation, and that's enough to get me into this cast. Along with Sheen, top marks to Bradley Whitford, longtime touchstone for this project I've been referencing since I talked about his mustache on The Good Guys in May of last year, but definitely since I started my Studio 6 Feet Under game. Technically since episode 43, but crossing those connections since episode 42. Along with those two, main cast featured Allison Janney, Tucker Channing, Richard Schiff, Elizabeth Moss, Dule Hill, Rob Lowe, Janelle Maloney, John Friggin Spencer, Catherine Joyston, Josh Molina, Mary McCormick, Janine Garofalo, Jimmy Smits, Alan Alda, and keep scrolling down through IMDb here, I got Lily Tomlin, Kristen Chenoweth, Stephen J. Root, Mark Harmon, Ed O'Neill, Matthew Perry, Christian Slater, Jelko Ivanek, Edward James Olmos, National Treasure John freaking Goodman. I got Salika Matthew, I mentioned just got killed off in Claws up there. Not to mention I got Dean Norris in this, Jane Lynch was on this, CCH Pounder, Felicity Huffman, Glenn freaking Close, John Larroquette, Ian McShane, Gabrielle Union, Peter Scolari, J.K. Simmons, just saw him in the Bravo presentation of La La Land, Miguel Sandoval, Ray Wise, holy freaking Christ, Nick Offerman, Star Trek tie-ins. I got John Delancey, Armin Shimmerman, Robert Picardo, and, well, I'm getting into where people show up and play themselves, like John Bon Jovi and the Foo Fighters and Amy Mann, but wow, I mean, this production pulled in talent. More than a zillion cross-connections through my media collection, though this show, which I came to late, I had the first 2 seasons on DVD, but I don't think I ever hit record on the first run airing before we learned of John Spencer's passing in 2006. This show really strikes me as storytelling at its finest. The 6 top fan-voted episodes that I encountered heading into this installment were among the strongest. 20 Hours in America Part 2, Excelsis Deo, 2 Cathedrals, Posse Comitatus, In the Shadow of Two Gunmen, and one of them, well, it shouldn't be. The Stackhouse Filibuster is a second-season entry featuring George Coe as Senator Howard Stackhouse. The story is told from the perspective of White House staffers desperate to declare a win on a $6 billion health care bill and leave on vacations they've all planned for months, and the whole damn episode is everyone whining about this ordinary senator who won't sit down and shut up. He's reading out a recipe book, for Christ's sakes, and steadfastly refusing to allow a vote on the bill. We discover why about 3/4 of the way through. Staffer Donna notices that in campaign materials with his grandchildren, Stackhouse has 7, but you only ever see 6, and makes the leap that oh wow, one of his grandchildren is autistic and that's why he's holding up passage of the bill. While the bill is being put together, Stackhouse was calling for autism research centers to open across the country, but Deputy Chief of Staff John Lyman, Bradley freaking Whitford, wasn't adding anything to the then $9 billion bill, was desperately looking for stuff to cut, and that at $6 billion it had strong bipartisan support. So Stackhouse took to the Senate floor and filibustered, and once Donna twigged at that connection about his grandchild, everyone in the West Wing was suddenly supportive. Hooray, this bill we've been working on for months is going to get torn down and rewritten. Autistic Center's going to get funded. Jeb Bartlett crowing about the orneriness of grandfathers. But, well, thinking about it all, Josh would know why Stackhouse was blocking the bill. He was the one doing the legwork, drumming support for it. Certainly wouldn't need Donna to tell him about an autistic grandchild. And hell, the autistic grandchild of a senator would be getting the absolute best care available in this country to begin with. This isn't C-SPAN. We're not watching actual policy being made. It's all drama and storytelling. But that's the world this show crafts. Honorable, well-meaning people ultimately doing the right thing. Well, I do gotta mention it. There were quite a few white people in Bartlett's West Wing, which stands out about as much as it does right now for reasons, but by the end of the run this show, the universe of this show, posed Jimmy Smith as Congressman Matt Santos winning the White House. Yeah, 5 years after African-American Dennis Haysbert took office in 24, but still 2 years before an African-American actually won the office in 2008, so progress was envisioned. Just since the show agonized over and over again about staffing the best people for the tasks at hand, one wonders how many got overlooked, and not so much this pretend White House as casting priorities. If the people you see in leadership roles all kind of look a certain way, maybe expand that view. Calling this up for my feature here, I clicked back through my catalog and found a handful of 7th season episodes I'd recorded contemporaneously off NBC and then archived to discs 127, 319, and 538. Oh, and for reasons I may one day even discover, the opening credit sequence for Season 2's In the Shadow of Two Gunmen on disc 74, but probably most of the rest of these are going to be from syndication on Bravo, and for sure looking forward to finding more of them. Cross Connection. Obviously, there's zero Studio 6 Feet Under competition with The West Wing, so shifting focus a bit for this one, last time in episode 51 I talked about a bunch of random movies that were airing on the FXM channel. I caught half a dozen or so, and they're absolutely coming up for discussion later, but highlighting a few here, I saw the 1959 adaptation of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, kinda nutty. Lead actor Pat Boone appeared in Frasier with Kelsey Grammer, who was in Back to You with Studio 60's Ada Field. The 1976 animated production Wizards featured the voice talents of Mark Hamill, who was in The Simpsons with Hank Azaria, who was on Brockmire with Studio 60's Amanda Peet. In 1942's The Man Who Wouldn't Die, I found Lloyd Nolan in Hannah and Her Sisters with Michael Caine, who's been in, well, everything, including Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Francis Conroy of 6 Feet Under. It's a pretty tight connection for 1942. Will success spoil Rock Hunter? Yep. Tony Randall's fun. I'm showing him in King of Comedy with Sandra Bernhardt, who's in American Horror Story with Sarah Paulson of Studio 60. And from The Third Secret, I'm showing Dame Judi Dench, James Bond's boss in Die Another Day, with Halle Berry cast in Catwoman opposite Francis Conroy from 6 Feet Under. 23 Paces to Baker Street was an interesting addition to this collection, with cast member Martin Benson appearing in the Jesus of Nazareth television miniseries as a Pharisee, and with Wire in the Blood and the UK version of Touching Evil's Robson Green on the long-running British series Casualty. Also of interest, I'm showing 23 Paces actress Estelle Winwood in Murder by Death with Peter Sellers, yes, but also with James Coco in... Well, this is going to take a bit of setting up. See, I also saw Mr. 880, 1950s yarn heavily influenced by the U.S. Treasury. Both James Coco as well as Mr. 880 lead actress Dorothy McGuire appeared in Saint Elsewhere with Ed Begley Jr., who had a recurring role on 6 Feet Under. This was kind of a cool find since I encounter Ed Begley Jr. at several different points in my collection. He made an appearance on Boston Legal, bringing everyone involved in that series one step removed from 6 Feet Under, as well as his appearances in Veronica Mars, Stuff My Dad Says, a further link with the denniest of cranes, William Shatner. He was in Kingdom Hospital, he was in Monk, Rizzolian Isles, Hot in Cleveland, and Arrested Development. He was in Best of Show, A Mighty Wind. Those links strengthened in his appearance on Better Call Saul with Michael McKean. He was in Joey in 1997, but those links probably go to Matthew Perry, and his links through The West Wing and The Good Guys get eclipsed by Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip's Bradley Whitford. Same distance from a smaller target. I noticed that, like René Auberginois, Ed Begley Jr. played 2 different characters from The Practice to its Boston Legal spin-off. Ultimately, E-Bags pulls in further connections I'd otherwise forgotten about. His appearance in Boston Legal pulls in a lot of connections throughout my collection, and I was glad to track these new connections through my viewing of 23 Steps and Mr. 880. In other connections, a Season 4 episode of Monk, Mr. Monk Bumps His Head, featured Laurie Metcalf as Cora Little, a woman who takes advantage when Monk gets amnesia. Basically a gender-swapped rendition of Overboard. Jason Manzoukis from Parks and Rec and The Good Place played the Big Bad Wolf in a recent episode of Legion. Very weird show. Then I saw Mark A. Sheppard playing founder and CEO of Fat Boy Industries, Manservant Neville, on the run-up to the series finale of ABC's The Middleman. Finally, last time I mentioned encountering Jane Lynch in a 3rd season episode of Psych, but I neglected to mention spotting Barry Corbin as some sort of offshore oil developer, much more familiar to me as Kira Sedgwick's Brenda Lee Johnson's father on The Closer. Cool to see him again here.
Diving into the classic collection.
When I encountered that portion of Bravo's The West Wing marathon, I had not yet cataloged my archived copy of C-SPAN's coverage of the Democratic National Convention held in August of 2008 in Denver, Colorado. When I did, I couldn't believe the synergy. From what I've found thus far, I was able to archive then-Senators Joe Biden and Barack Obama's speeches accepting the Democratic nominations to the Vice Presidency and Presidency of the United States. I did not pull them up for a fresh listen as I cataloged the entries, but I was happy to locate them. Part of this effort involves archiving historical events, and I'm glad I have this. I did notice post-adjournment, while the event wound down and C-SPAN was taking calls from supporters and detractors, they continued to air live video from the event. They'd mounted one poor Johnny 5 camera to a zip line to capture aerial views of the crowd. Well, after Obama spoke, there was a swoosh of streamers that just enveloped that poor little dude. The rig operators kind of floated him back and forth, and he looked for all the world like some kind of completely out-of-place Halloween mummy decoration. When they cut to that camera, all you could see were streamers. It wasn't as outlandish as Bill Clinton's wide-eyed discovery for the first time of balloons at the 2016 convention, but it was definitely up there. Speaking of bizarre, the me that I was in 2008 assumed that I'd also need Daily Show coverage of these conventions. That is also a tradition for this archive, but oh man, I'll tell you, at the time, I was features editor for a Middle Western daily. I had access to news, and nothing but news all day. I appreciated the filter provided by Jon Stewart and co., but in the aftermath, post the election coverage, almost nothing is staler. I determined that the Daily Show and Colbert Reports I encounter will get a timestamp, a brief topic note, name the guest interviewed if I kept it, and that'll be enough for now, because I know I kept a lot of it, and I also know I'm not going to be referencing it much. If I ever want something more detailed, it's all still there, and I'll know exactly where it is. And just a coda to my West Wing discussion, I mentioned pulling up past discs to see the past episodes I'd archived. That odd 20-second scrap of Season 2's In the Shadow of Two Gunmen Part 2. When I pulled that up, it was followed by the visually stunning music video for Franz Ferdinand's Take Me Out. So that was fun. And Season 7's Institutional Memory on Disc 127 was preceded by my copy of the HBO presentation of Bob Fosse's All That Jazz from 1979. So I saw the last part of that in putting this together. Eye-catching. So much more regal was the episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus, where Per an announcement by John Cleese at the top of the show, they'd been informed ahead of the broadcast that Her Majesty the Queen might be tuning in at some point during the production. This second season capstone featured a tasteful rendition of the opening credits animation to the muted strains of Pomp and Circumstance. It featured Welsh coal miners getting into fistfights over historical facts, sailors lost at sea grimly weighing the relative merits of cannibalism, an insurance sketch that was getting quite objectionable just as they learned Her Royal Highness was tuning in, and closed out by the most tasteless sketch imaginable, set at a funeral parlor in which Graham Chapman as an undertaker suggested John Cleese as the bereaved might, well, his late mother's in pretty good shape, he might wish to eat her. Cleese admitted to being intrigued but put off somehow, to which Chapman responded with this line: "Tell you what, you eat her, and if you feel a bit guilty afterwards, we'll dig a grave and you can throw up in it." Downright apoplectic, the audience furiously stormed the stage and might have given the actor serious what for if the Queen hadn't at that moment switched back. Everyone stood quietly at attention as the closing credits rolled. Notes closing out this section, I wanted to mention an I Spied from the first season episode of Ugly Betty. The Halloween episode I catalogued on disc 723 featured Michael Urie as Markston James and the most delightful drag as editorial assistant Betty Suarez. Hola! Complete with wig, glasses, and a vibrant tourist poncho from Guadalajara. As Wilhelmina Slater averred, that is so cruel. I think someone may be getting a raise. Also, I catalogued the fourth season Monk episode, Mr. Monk Goes to a Fashion Show. There was a case where Malcolm McDowell played a fashion designer Monk suspected of murder. Getting us to that point, Monk had a favorite shirt inspector. So impressed with her work. Lately her work was subpar, and he determined something must be wrong. So he visited the factory where she works, and indeed she's upset. Her son was in prison for murder, but he was innocent. She knew who Monk was because he'd sent her the only letter of appreciation she'd ever received from anyone, so momentous she'd framed it and hung it at her station. Well, whatever production assistant was tasked with crafting this letter, no one was counting on anyone actually using frame advance because the main paragraph, fair, glowing with praise, well, it's not that long. Here's what it said. It's headed from the desk of Adrian Monk, but the letter was generated. I'm not recognizing the font, but it resembles Montserrat. It reads, "Dear Inspector Number 8, I wish to express my deepest and warmest thanks for your stunning performance as clothing inspector. It's a pleasure to deal with someone who possesses such artistic integrity. Your job aptitude is something to be admired and inspired by. Every item which passes your inspection is impeccably produced and presented. The buttons are perfectly straight. The stitching is even and orderly. There are no hanging or pulled strings, marks, or wrinkles. The finished product is perfectly folded." Then, for no other reason except whoever put it together imagined no one had this level of free time to devote to this, it starts over again at, "Your job aptitude is something to be admired and inspired by. Every item which passes your inspection is impeccably produced and presented. The buttons are perfectly straight. The stitching is even and orderly. There are no hanging or pulled strings, marks, or wrinkles. The finished product is perfectly folded." Down to, "Thank you again. My appreciation knows no bounds. Sincerely, Adrian Monk," with no signature. It feels like something the writers should have generated. They might have been busy, of course, with the generated newspaper clippings Natalie quickly riffles through reporting on the murder, and Inspector Number 8, Ms. Ortiz, certainly keeps a lot of scrapbooking materials at her workstation, but yeah, particularly in an age of high definition, all generated props have to be practical. Hell, a handwritten note by nearly anyone would have been more authentic and likely wouldn't have repeated itself halfway through. Finally, after I catalogued the 11th season episode of The Simpsons, It's a Mad, 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 Mad Marge from disc 717, where Chief Wiggum was arresting her for a jealous rage, I thought you said the law was powerless. "Powerless to help you," he said, "not to punish you." Friend of the podcast, Heather Welliver, posted a meme of this exchange just a couple days after I'd catalogued that entry, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I just saw that episode in my collection. Cool." And she said, "That is kismet." Indeed. I love stuff like that, where they're running a Bob Fosse biopic and I encounter the Simpsons episode featuring a Fosse-inspired Chaz Busby. Or they're showing The Feud with Betty and Joan on FX and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane over on Turner Classic Movies. Or when I run into my copy of 2007's In the Shadow of the Moon and the run-up to the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon mission. That kind of stuff, running into those kind of coincidences. Well, honestly, a Simpsons meme you'll run into potentially a dozen every day. The reason that one stood out was because I had just cataloged that episode. But having done so, you're just more aware of connections and coincidences. Enfin, the mind seeks patterns. The more data you feed it, the more patterns you'll see, and in the meantime, enjoy.
Current collection.
Heads up, we are going to get spoilery. The series finale of Legion aired Monday, and whatever I was expecting, no, scratch that, I was hoping against hope for something exactly like this, but the way they did it was outstanding. The FX series Legion was inspired by the Marvel comic of that name, wherein David Haller, the estranged son of Professor Charles Xavier, was put up for adoption and grown up, tortured not only by the multiple personalities housed inside his head, but also the parasitic Shadow King Amal Farouk, banished by Chuck from the astral plane, hid and took refuge in the infant David's mind. This David grew up broken, abandoned, his brain host to a merciless tyrant and a host of voices, abandoned and so lost. The run-up to the finale posed a battle royale. David traveled back in time to join his father, Charles, in facing down Amal Farouk, the Shadow King, who Charles took on back in the day, as well as Farouk from David's time in his palace in Morocco. Alongside this showdown, a continent removed, Sid, newly restored by her time in the astral plane with Oliver and Melanie, kept watch over David's mother Gabrielle and David as an infant, while warrior girl Carrie fought the time demons. Speaking of time, Switch is barely holding it together, exhausted from bringing David back, from holding the door open so as to bring Sid and the Carries back, the seismic shockwaves of traveling the time corridor that far back, and she is just wrung out. Sensibly, the show did not try to tell all these stories at exactly the same time, so I won't either. First, David versus past Farouk. David pulls past Farouk into his own head, and Farouk quickly discovers that there are so many Davids in there. He takes them on one at a time, and for a while gains ascendancy, exploiting David's abandonment issues, that he's been lost and unloved since his infancy. David responds by reaching out to his mother for support, in the words of Pink Floyd's Mother, a dark and not entirely healthy relationship as written, but in the context of this show, his mother's love is there, he is assured of it, he can rely upon it, and by the end of the song he overthrows Farouk. Second, Carries versus the Time Demons. This felt ambitious, but as David and Charles were mind-fighting their respective Farouks, out here in what I suppose must be regarded as consensus reality, despite it being a subjective take on whenever David's infancy was, Sid is protecting Gabrielle and the infant David at their home in England, while Carrie is fighting what seemed to be an endless stream of time-eating demons. She and... I loved this appellation from Oliver Bird, so I'm going to use it here. She and Glasses McLabcoat recombined their physical presence, doubling their temporal footprint, as it were, so as to confuse the time demons. Warrior Carrie aged visibly, but to the extent it held them off, the move was successful. Thirdly, Charles versus present-day Farouk. Enfolding Farouk into the astral plane, Charles intends to fight him. David showed Charles the monster that Farouk had been, but almost immediately, Farouk seeks to dialogue with him, to tell him that he's aware of the damage done to David, the wreckage of his life. I mean, it kind of felt like if he'd had this epiphany a bit earlier, he wouldn't have needed to grab hold of Division 3 and swing them at David, who at that point was just chilling at the center of his love cult, sucking blue and feeling groovy. They came at him. But post his journey through the in-between time, Farouk finally seemed ready to be the grown-up, to say, look, I hurt you, you hurt me, what have we accomplished? Can't we just call this off? Charles agrees and puts the two Farouks together. Immediately past Farouk schemes and postures about power and destruction and domination, and present-day Farouk is all, wow, was I ever this small, this petty, this... Look, he says, look at the path of destruction this carves. He shows his past self what a nightmare he's been, and past Farouk is shaken to his core. That leaves us with Switch, suffering, struggling to hold reality together. She shakes, she is falling apart physically. She pulls herself back into her time corridor, where time demons are waiting for her. They creep closer and closer to her until her father arrives. He calls them the Guardians, and they're vicious, but they're well-trained, and he controls them. He calls them off, and... oh, wow. He was the voice on her tape. I just realized that. He congratulates Switch that her baby teeth have fallen out, and her wisdom teeth have come in. For her part, she's amazed to see him, and asks what happened to his screen. He shed it, he said, motioning, just as she had. She looks back and sees her lifeless body on the bed. She stands before him transformed, almost glowing. She has become a fourth-dimensional being now. He bids her join him, but there's one last thing she must do. She steps back into the battle with the Time Eaters that Carrie is fighting in England and addresses everyone. She calls everyone by name and introduces herself as Time. She says all of them are important and they will exist, but their lives and their memories will be different. When David appears, she gives Sid and David a moment to talk. David apologizes. Sid deflects it, but not with much energy. He wondered why she helped him. She said she didn't. Looking at the infant David, she says, I helped him. And with that, David and Sid the Broken vanished. As for what happened, well, at the end of the episode there was a button the show invited us to press to start again. What happened? Well, I've been thinking about this a lot as the body counts rose and the battles wore on with little hope of dialogue or reconciliation among the many warring factors, the wars within David and Farouk, David and Sid, David and Lenny, David and Division 3, within David himself, within Division 3 itself, and my mind kept going back to, there was an episode about the exact midpoint of this series, episode 14 of season 2, a multiverse that explored a vast range of outcomes for David. David homeless, David working in a warehouse, barely holding it together on medication, David grown old and completely out of it, David frantically explaining the multiverse from my episode 26. In the multiverse reality, every choice causes a new universe. Every choice causes new branches, into new universes, into new branches, into new universes, new branches, and new universes. What happens to all those universes and all of those branches? We saw evil David taking over a multinational corporation and torturing his staff, David blowing up the world, and then, in one very quick, unremarkable passage, nothing about it even remotely memorable, David wakes up and he's married and has 2 kids. He's happy and his life is quite lovely. As Charles held and hugged his son and told him he loved him, that he'd never abandon him, the only world he could see doing that is if he needed to protect him, but he adores him, and together they could build a different world, a better one. I like to think that outcome, happy, healthy, loving family, that potential was the one that ultimately prevailed. This outcome honors the graphic novels, it honors the wild 3-season journey we've all been on together with these characters, but it also celebrates new, different, healthier, and less destructive outcomes, and asserts, strong as I've seen it anywhere, the importance of love and communication in a child's development, not only to the child, but to the world that child walks into. Together, we need to build better worlds. Well done, Noah Hawley, and everyone involved in this production. Well friggin' done. Season 4 of AMC's Preacher opened with God's judgment upon his disobedient creation. Apparently, God sent the meteor that destroyed the dinosaurs because they ate their own dog mess and then belched in his face. Well, that was 65 million years ago. In the present day, Grailco, under the new leadership of Herr Starr, is frantically looking for the one true, horrifyingly inbred descendant of Christ from episode 33.
Inbred genetic grab bag of what the hell is that?
Loosed with the others by title character Jesse Custer. They're looking for him too. They want to steal his power, the Genesis, the very voice of God. When he speaks in that voice, people listen. Just that this season we're also seeing some limitations on that power. It doesn't seem to work with noise-canceling headphones, for instance. It doesn't work if the one listening doesn't speak the language. Also, you can demand something, but that doesn't always mean that your wishes will be carried out as you were hoping. It adds a new wrinkle. In the meantime, they're holding the vampire Cassidy hostage at the Grail Co. Masada compound, and Jesse's ex, Tulip, is working furiously to spring him free. The killer saint is taking Arseface back to hell, I think. I'll have to watch that story a little closer next time, and oh yeah, Hitler wants Jesse to come and rule hell. Jesse's been distracted shooting up a party at a sex club. Guys, it's like the fourth one of these I've encountered on basic cable. It's only edgy up until it's not anymore. The camera work leveling out at a 16.9 aspect ratio covering 3 rooms was cool, cinematic. A preacher taking on dozens of sex partiers in the broadest array of fetish gear. It kind of looked like something out of Tarantino meets Hieronymus Bosch. But yeah, he'd gone in there to save this child, a place called Jesus de Sod, somehow affiliated with Grail Co., and God's a furry who likes to hang out in there, so probably that's not going to be the last we're seeing of that. But yeah, all they could show with the child Jesse'd gone in there to save was a fully clothed vintage costume photo shoot. The kid, very jaded, not asking to be saved, took a stray bullet in the crossfire and died, so on balance, probably worse for that intervention. But, of course, given Jesse's background as a victim of child abuse, he had to try. The show racks a pretty high body count, so that was just the latest. All of that said, I have definitely missed this outrageous, outlandish, perfectly bizarre graphic novel-inspired speculation, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they're taking us this season. Well done. On Pose, a playful sibling spat at the house of Evangelista spun into high drama when Damon revealed Angel's drug use to house mother Blanca. Angel at first denied it, but then admitted it, accepting her banishment and moving into a new place with boyfriend Poppy, and no reason not to with the money she's got rolling in from her modeling. Meanwhile, Pray Tell is hooked up with Ricky. At first, he knows. Tells him flat out he knows Ricky, 20 years younger than him, 20 years hotter than him, is a player who will break his heart. But it's a chance, curse his loneliness, a chance he is willing to take. The next day he wakes up alone in his bed, and he's convinced he was right, until he finds Ricky cooking a huge breakfast for them, and he melts a little. I haven't gotten to see the beach party episode yet, no idea, but I suspect it has to be a bit of a nightmare for drag, natural light, and minimal clothing. But from previews, it sounded like their main problems involved heartache. Looking forward to that. The season finale, I believe, is coming up this week, so definitely looking forward to that as well. On USA's Pearson, back in Chicago, Pearson's covering for the mayor's extended absence, during which time the deputy mayor is trying to get a street name for a Black Panther from back in the day, which, yeah, sure, all the other problems we're facing as a city seem to be solved. Let's use the mayor's extended family leave to push through pet projects that he's forbidden and we've determined will rile the police. Brilliant. I mean, yay cultural heritage and civic history, but sometimes it feels like this thing was written by kids. I'm watching specifically Virginia Torres now. If nothing else, she's killing it, but that's pretty much it. The Archer 1999 season finale was not the series finale I was hoping it would be, but I did call it. With a self-destruct detonation aboard the Seamus, the show finally pulled the man out of his coma. That said, they did leave us with a lingering sense of uncomfortable cringeworthiness, with Mallory demonstrating a somewhat more than motherly love for Archer, closing on the discomfort that he shared with, I've got to imagine, at least most of us viewers, so I guess we'll see where they intend to go with that when the animated spy series resumes. Finally, referencing the title for this episode, I fired up my Frame Advance to catch this fantastic interactive Adult Swim bumper headed Metaphysical Zoological Hallucinations. Saw that on Adult Swim. Images cycled left to right across my screen, along with generated captions. Viewers could hit the pause button to view what Adult Swim called their Metaphysical Zoological Hallucinations. These included Motar, a progressive, Heffalump, an elephant, Yappy Bitch, a Champs-Élysées, Duck, a duck, Gritty, a hockey mascot, Hoppy Boy, a bunny, Phytoplankton, Lizzo, Gosling, a baby goose, Gosling, as in Ryan, Rat Snake, a ferret or weasel, I think, Happy Feet, a penguin, Gazorpian, a Rick and Morty villain, a Chocobo, an ostrich, Uniceratops, a rhino, Cutie Cthulhu, an octopus, Fuzzy Whore of Internet, a kitten, Goat, with neck for a brush similarly to Gritty, Goat, that is the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, Burr, a bear, a squirrel, a squirrel, Fishy, a goldfish, Tardigrade, Slytherin, a pit viper, I think, Banana Joe, a sort of claymation banana, Turtle, a turtle, Flappy, that was a bird, Wombat, almost done here, Moloch, Dark Lord of Sacrifice, a bull, Piggy, a pig, and Weirdo Duck, a platypus. It then cycled through again from the top in the same order. They ran through the photo catalog 5 times across what Shazam confirmed was Ennio Morricone's peppy, cheerful twist. I've got to say, to me, the cleverest entry seemed to be the Motar, who appears in a Progressive commercial. The Motar is portrayed by Terence Terrell in a brown leather jacket from the waist up, and from the waist down, a motorcycle. Other cool entries were Gritty, mascot for the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team, and probably the cutest, most engaging picture of a tardigrade I've ever seen. Also, calling a platypus a weirdo duck was fun. Yep, that whole bump was maybe 5 seconds altogether, but when someone does something clever, I feel like it's always nice to lift it up and acknowledge it. Well done, guys.
VideoFuzzy at the movies.
Last week, Bravo aired 2016's La La Land, starring Ryan Gosling, oh hey, as Sebastian, and the freakishly beautiful Emma Stone as Mia. They play young Hollywoodians surrounded on all sides by talent. Emma is a barista to the stars on the Paramount lot, but cannot seem to catch a break. Sebastian is a serious musician in a town that is serious about nothing. He gets enough work to keep him in eviction notices, and Mia is losing hope till they find each other, challenge each other, and strengthen each other, and Seb joins a band that hampers his creativity but makes him a success, and Mia writes a one-woman show that bottoms out, but one casting director was in the right audience at the right time and gives her the best shot she's ever had at anything. La La Land is a musical, so song and dance numbers are woven liberally throughout, and in a show that opens on a traffic jam in which everyone hops out of their cars and sings and dances, we needn't be too strict about realism. So the final third of the movie is a rolling pastiche of itself, with old-timey Hollywood, old-style Broadway, golden age of television, I think shadow puppetry at one point. It got confusing, but I think we're meant to understand that these two found success and happiness and fulfillment, and whichever of the happy endings were theirs, they all seemed pretty happy. Longtime listeners to this podcast will already have twigged to the fact that I love this film. It was everything I love about theater and acting and craft. You can, I'm sure, hear it in my voice. I'd say highly recommended. Following on that whimsical revelation, I was clicking through the listings of the FX movie channel, not a bad selection all told, and discovered something called FXM Retro, a sort of Turner Classic Movies, but worse. Yep, that's pretty subjective, but from the descriptions they all sounded like backlot mysteries and classics I had just somehow never seen before. For the viewing of them, however, well, for one thing, they aired commercial-free, and for two things, there's pretty good reasons why I and probably no one has seen these much. Sure, studios made them and marketing happened, but for each of them, something was just off. Take, for instance, the 1959 adaptation of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. This improbable adventure farce posits a message carved in stone, found amid volcanic effluvia, and passed to renowned Scots geologist Sir Oliver, who interprets the entry point for descent into, well, the geographical center, puts his team together and finds the world is, who knew, hollow and navigable. For science. Their discoveries include a truly Mediterranean ocean, fantastic lizard creatures, a geological phenomenon whereby inches to the right or to the left, no impact, but when they achieve the very center of the Earth, the magnetic poles strip all the metal from their raft, including Sir Oliver's wire-bound notepad, so when he returns from this adventure, he has no notes with him, so he says, "You must disbelieve my report. I cannot prove I was ever at the center of the Earth." Despite his means of egress included a stone altar from the lost and apparently sunken city of Atlantis that they rode via airshaft to freedom, and which leg of this journey relieved young McEwen, played by Pat Boone, relieved him of his clothes and landed him well apart from his party in a tree near a convent. Well, we've all had that dream. Verne's fanciful writing explored ocean depths, subterranean wonders, the South Pole, the very moon, a practical guide to circumnavigation around the world in 80 days, which seems quaint from a time we've gotten it below 3 days now, but when he was writing, these ideas were expansive, inspiring, and, in the case of Journey, just incredibly silly, but fiction expands our horizons and then film helps us visualize it. Much more bizarre, I encountered the 1976 production of Wizards, directed by the team who brought you Fritz the Cat in 1972. By comparison, Wizards had way less sex and way more clothes. For the most part, Eleanor was never more than a stiff breeze away from full-frontal cartoon nudity, but the post-apocalyptic dystopia pits the light wizard Avatar against the forces of darkness marshaled by his estranged twin, Black Wolf, hewing to a solution of technology and fascism to overpower the elves and fairy folk trying to re-establish a world of magic and wonder. Black Wolf pumps terrifying Nazi imagery from millennia past that just demoralizes his enemies. Watch for social commentary on the dangers of fascism, outlandish bureaucracy, and the pointlessness of religion as Avatar puts his team together to counter the world's destruction and guide a morally ambiguous ostrich-mounted android to overcome his programming and walk a path of peace. Referencing my description of Adult Swim from episode 23, the actual caveat we should see is, you must be this high to enjoy this show. That level indicated by a cartoon dancer with a bamboo wang on top of a mountain with his hand way up near the top of the screen. It's insufferable. Utterly pointless. No wonder Mark Hamill attempted to hide his involvement in this movie via misspelling his name in the credits. From there we encounter the 1942 production, The Man Who Wouldn't Die, a sort of comic backlot mystery. A household has murdered and buried a business rival, and who should show up but Marjorie Weaver's prodigal daughter, Catherine Wolfe. She's up and married a wealthy young businessman no one in her family has met, and as she arrives, her father's business operation under investigation, and her stepmother, his wife Anna, keeps shush about what just happened in their house. Kathy knows something's up, particularly when the supposed dead guy rises from the grave and takes a shot at her in her room. She enlists the help of a private investigator to pose as her newlywed husband and figure out this mystery. They discover a lab in the basement set up to imbue eternal life. They uncover news clippings about a magician able to hold his breath in a buried live trick. They track footprints from the fresh grave through the garden. Ultimately, Kathy's real husband shows up to a "what's all this then?" from the local constabulary and her battle-axe father, and it becomes clear no one has any idea what is happening in this house. The thing collapses into, wow, that police chief is goofy, rich people are silly, wasn't that fun? Good night, everyone. Fifth entry of 7 in a series featuring Lloyd Nolan as Michael Shane, Private Eye, and completely missable. Sorry. Next one I saw was the 1956 entry 23 Paces to Baker Street, featuring Van Johnson as Philip Hannon, a blind American writer working in London, reacquainted unenthusiastically with Vera Miles as Jean Lennox, an old flame that went out bitterly. Phil becomes aware of a kidnapping plot but can't make the police take him seriously. With help from Jean and his faithful manservant, Phil uncovers the clues he needs to point the police in the right direction, guided at one point by his inordinately acute sense of smell, in the process becoming the target of the kidnappers himself. He determines to capture them, using himself as bait. What fell apart for this one is how no one on the production staff seems to question the efficacy of his trap, just turning the lights off in his flat and using recordings of his voice to confuse the fully sighted assailant while streetlight streams through unshaded windows and he's not technically hidden at any point, building to the towering conclusion that sends his assailant plummeting to the sidewalk below. It's sort of Hitchcock-light. Just to suspend that disbelief, 23 Steps was probably the least objectionable of the pieces I encountered in this FXM Retro series, but I've still got 5 to go here. Next to my catalog list was Robert Altman's 1979 dystopian ice scraper freezer burn Quintet. Envisioning a frozen world where people hunt for seals, then, having found no seals, come to town where roving packs of feral dogs gorge themselves on discarded corpses in the street, while inside long-abandoned World's Fair installations people cram in to play Quintet, a board game where they roll to see who dies, and in what order, and then, in one especially sinister instance, they go to the trouble of carrying out the specific results from one particular game, this most popular game anyone's ever played. Oh my god, have you people just never heard of Uno? Also, Altman smeared Vaseline around the viewfinder, so I watched this entire film through a Macy's Christmas display. I didn't like this film, felt nothing for any of these characters, never understood the game they were playing, or, more to the point, why. It was the dreariest Weltanschauung I've encountered since Suburbia last episode. No dice. Not that my next entry, the 1974 production 11 Harrowhouse, was so much better, but at least this one featured a 1974 Candice Bergen as Maren in trippy, skin-tight sheath dresses, along with her co-star Charles Grodin as Chesser, a completely world-weary and disillusioned diamond appraiser for 11 Harrowhouse, a diamond house and price-fixing operation that buys up the world's diamond supply and then sucks it away as a means of price manipulation. Well, one of their operatives, James Mason as Watts, has contracted a fatal illness, hasn't got long for this world, and damn it, it's only months away from his pension vesting. His family would want for nothing, but ooh, those money-grubbing diamond hoarders are going to repay his lifetime of service with a boot through the door. Chesser and Maren decide to throw in with Trevor Howard as Massey, a mad disruptor intent on bringing down that diamond operation. A good chunk of film tracks the not especially lively heist operation, which vacuums out the Harrowhouse diamond vault into a service van, and amid the shock of discovery, Watt's heart gives out, and the evil diamond hoarders are completely undone. Sadly for Chesser and Maren, it turns out that Massey just wanted to do the same thing Harrowhouse was doing and slit their throats for their trouble. There's an outlandish Blake Edward-esque chase sequence in which Maren puts her sexy little sports car through its paces and they escape their pursuers, upon which they have a decision to make. Since Harrowhouse was doing no more good with the world's diamond surplus than anyone else, they skimmed $20 million worth of the haul for themselves and dumped the remainder into a construction project, billions of dollars worth of diamonds hidden in concrete underneath a fountain. This one was admittedly quite a bit more visually exciting and a much higher energy than the others, but for all that, the heist was interminable. Even Chesser and Maren in a boudoir had trouble enlivening this passage because their time there was mainly spent painting cockroaches, and the whole rest of the time was spent outsmarting electronics, and when they finally got to it, it felt like we watched James Mason vacuum out every drawer in the vault in real time. It dragged, I guess is what I'm saying. We could have done with some editing. Another entry that suffered from poor editing choices was the 1950 U.S. Treasury Public Service and Education document Mr. 880, a treatise on counterfeiting and the public's obligation to fight it. We're assured that anti-counterfeiting agents in the employ of U.S. Treasury Division are driven professionals working tirelessly in the public interest. They find any monopoly money out there, they track it to its source, and that guy is arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and just about immediately too, so don't get no ideas. Well, sometime a little junk dealer in the North Bronx passes, like, less than $50 a year in bad bills. I mean, really bad. These things are like loose-leaf notepaper, actively unconvincing, all the same numbers from one to the next, actually include egregious misspellings. Even so, it takes them more than a decade to bring this guy to justice, and he becomes the stuff of legend. Case File 880, Mr. 880, this elusive criminal mastermind. Well, dang it, not anymore. We're putting Burt Lancaster on the case. Steve Buchanan, U.S. Treasury. His investigations lead him to the vivacious Dorothy McGuire as Anne Winslow, actually unwitting co-tenant in the same apartment building as public enemy number one, this Mr. 880, a.k.a. William Skipper Miller, who sneaks his bad bills into her purse without her knowing, gives it out like it's fake money. People don't even look at it because he's such a dear old sweetie, but when they try to deposit it, they get all mad at the bank and at investigators. It's like, as they ultimately explain to him, he's a thief. He's stealing goods and services, an abuse of public trust. But then, when they finally arrest him and put him in front of a judge, it takes them over an hour despite there being cameras on him the whole time. Oh, let's just go easy on him, Your Honor. He didn't mean nothing by it. He's a sweet old man, and here's his service record, Your Honor. He's a veteran, honorably discharged and everything. Let's just give him a break. Well, if he's a veteran, why is he starving to death in a junk dealer's hoard, unable to pay his medical bills? Let's look after our servicemen so they don't need to crime, maybe. Well, anyway, happy endings all around. Time served, fine of $1. Oh, don't let him pay it. Steve and Anne can get together, and the rest of you keep an eye out for counterfeit bills, okay? The last two I have the least to say about. The 1957 entry, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, was a comic romp spoofing advertising and business culture. Title character Tony Randall plays an advertiser who needs a hit idea for his cosmetics campaign or his company will lose the account. At that moment, Jane Mansfield as Rita Marlowe is fleeing Hollywood to get away from her controlling boyfriend. Rock meets up with her, gets her to sign on to his ad campaign in exchange for... what? Marriage? Marriage to a blonde bombshell. Well, it's a sacrifice for sure, but oh, right, Betsy Drake, his actual girlfriend, Jenny Wells, isn't quite so sanguine with regard to this business arrangement. In the way of these movies, absolutely ridiculous and high camp situations ensue, and Rock has to weigh his newfound taste for success with what his heart is telling him, but in the end, everyone gets to define success in their own way. Probably the fourth wall crashing opening sequence is the most memorable aspect of this piece. Well, Betsy Drake with a 12-inch waist is not to be missed, but the ad spoofs at the beginning and the pot shots at television in the intermission made for some comic commentary. The last of my FXM Retro series entries, 1964, The Third Secret, was an intriguing entry for this collection, given my interest in psychological criminal inquiry. Stephen Boyd as Alex Stedman, a television newsreader, is spun when his psychologist, Dr. Whitsett, turns up dead, an apparent suicide. The case is complicated when Whitsett's orphan daughter, Catherine, approaches him about her suspicions. Perhaps one of Whitsett's other 4 patients, beyond himself, of course, might be responsible. Stedman investigates, and as the movie explores the secrets of our lives, the first secret is what we don't tell other people, the second is what we don't tell ourselves, and the third, well, he discovers the third secret is bound up in Whitsett's 6th patient, his own daughter. Which, no, it doesn't hold up to any scrutiny at all. A psychologist who doesn't keep any notes, who has no staff or secretary, who wouldn't immediately know that he was also treating his own daughter's paranoid schizophrenia, and all his notes are locked away in a file cabinet in a country house that also no one knows about. Really, the only redeeming aspect of this dragging brood of a film is the introduction it serves to Dame Judi Dench. Otherwise, that's a no from me on this one, too. Sorry. Closing out this section, I just heard about Peter Fonda's passing. I was sorry to hear about that. Most significant present in my collection I'm aware of is probably Mephistopheles and Ghost Rider, which has not turned up yet, but I'm sure I have in here somewhere. I suspect I've got Easy Rider in here somewhere as well, but with less certainty. Certainly a compelling performer, one who helped define a generation. He will be missed.
Upcoming shows.
And for upcoming shows, actually it's already running. Really quick here, I noticed where Comedy Central started airing 3rd season episodes of BoJack Horseman. Got a couple stacked up on my DVR. Can't wait to see what they're getting up to this season. And with that, thank you so much for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes at Apple Podcasts. Feedback is always appreciated. You can contact me through my blog or podcast sites via email or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook, or you can follow me at TJVideoFuzzy on Twitter. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman. Happy viewing!
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.